Washington must add Gavin Day to the 2026 class.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Just a quick reminder, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you don't miss when we post a new video. And over on the social media side of things, make sure you leave us a follow wherever you're on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're there at Locked On Huskies with a whole bunch of fun stuff coming at you throughout the offseason. Just like Lars, we've got a whole bunch of fun stuff coming at the Everydayers today. We're going to get into some of your biggest sleepers for 2025 because the Everydayers heard mine just the other day. We're going to talk about Anthony Jones, one of Washington's top defensive line targets, who committed to UCLA, what that means, where that's going. But we're going to talk about what Washington needs in the secondary because as you and I kind of looked over this class, we said, Washington needs another safety, somebody big body, versatile, hard hitter. We like Chase Calicut, but after this latest offer, you and I absolutely love Gavin Day.
And it's that Vegas connection, that Nevada connection that Washington really seems to be building. And you just look at the way that he plays, and it's no slight to any other player. It's just some guys it's a better fit. You can almost look at like what happened at quarterback, and it's like no slight at one, but it's just this guy actually might just be a better fit. But either way, you look at Gavin Day's film, and it's just like, man, it's a massive. It just pops right on the screen.
So much fun, man.
And that's why I'm just like, I can see TaylorMade just being like, yeah, like that's my guy. Like it's not that nobody else isn't. It's just like, man, that is numero uno that we need to go get.
Right. So I'm glad you phrased it that way because I look at that and you're not phasing out Chase Calicut. You absolutely still want to take that guy as well. You can find room in this class for both those guys because of the versatility, because of everything else you bring to the table, where you end up finding a way to take both those guys. You get on campus and you look at, let's just say you look at Gavin Day and it's, yeah, this is somebody who we view more like Donovan Robinson. And obviously he's listed as a safety right now on the roster, but it's, maybe in a year or two, he ends up just playing linebacker full time. That's okay. You can find a way to make that work. And I look at Gavin, you talked about it. The film is so much fun. The way he's able to just come down and hit is just fantastic. I look at just some of the other safeties that Washington has looked at. I love the way CJ Lavender, Washington's one commit at the position, does play, but it's just a different style of player. Where I look at CJ and he is really, really good in coverage. He's got great ball skills. He's got great eyes and just knows how to find the ball. But with Gavin, it's just one of those things where you and I looked at, CJ Christian all spring and the way he played that box safety role in this Ryan Walters defense. And I feel like I could see him just doing that very well, where that's going to ask him to play man coverage against tight ends. That's going to ask him to, at points, just fill holes and run support. And that's still going to ask him to drop back and play in a zone coverage over the top at different times too, which is one of the fun things about this Ryan Walters defense is it's going to ask you to do a lot of different things. And I look at, as we talked about on yesterday's show, the other schools that are recruiting him or the other schools he's got official visits lined up with in Arizona, Utah, and Iowa. And I say, who better to coach that guy than one of the hardest hitting safeties of all time, according to everybody who commented on our TikTok of him, and that's Taylor Mays.
Exactly. That was the guy that came to mind when it's like you watch Gavin Day's film and it's like, is there not a better guy to coach him than Taylor Mays? I mean, the guy, like literally, when you think of Taylor Mays at USC, one of those things that comes to mind is those big hits, those big plays, just that physically imposing. And by the way, I mean, when he was obviously go check out the story on Huskies Wire, but when the coaches were at Modern Day this past week, Taylor Mays was like, somebody said like Juan Soto, and it was like, it just looked like physically imposing. And it's just one of those things where it's like, you just look at Gavin Day, it passes the look test, but it also passes the sense test. And it's not a sense of like the smell, it doesn't pass the sniff test. Everything just makes sense. That's the whole point there. And when you're looking at CJ Lavender, it kind of makes me think of the whole like McKell thing, where it's like you still need that guy where you can kind of be the rover and kind of do a number of different things. But it's why you get two or three different types of safeties. And this is that big hitter to complement CJ. And then when you have the cornerbacks outside, that you're on the island, that's why you need those kind of big roving safeties who can kind of do a number of different things.
And that's one of the important things with Chase Calicut too, where I feel like he's just a little bit better in terms of that over the top, like, cover 1, cover 3 look where you're having him drop back and just play a true center field. So that's why you still really do have room for both those guys. But the other thing I look at this class and I say, you still really need is I really like Elijah Durer, but I think you need just that big lockdown corner on the outside. And I thought about saying Devon Benjamin for this, but I really do believe, and after he was upgraded to a 4-star as well, I look at Jeron Jones and I say, this guy is somebody Washington needs to pull in as well.
I agree with that. It's just because ironically, that was the one name that I was looking at where it's like, obviously Devon Benjamin is the one guy where you still go and take the swing until he says no. But Jeron Jones is that guy where a little bit taller, 6'1", 6 foot, 185, 170.
Something like that, yeah.
Something in that range. But where, again, you're talking about the whole 5'11", 6 foot, 6'1". At the end of the day, we've seen a number of guys where it's like, are you wearing cleats with that height or not? Because the point with Jeron Jones is he plays above that listed height. He has that physicality, the ability to go make some plays. Another guy that I would still that I'm just intrigued in that same mold with where I think Jeron Jones should be ahead of Derek Johnson at this moment. But where does Derek Johnson fit in this? Because now that is back in the mix for him, you got a tall, lengthy cornerback where we certainly know how John Richardson loves those guys with DeCario and Patience. But obviously, Jeron Jones has obviously been higher on their list for a while now. But the fact that they're kind of still in the mix with Derek Johnson, to me, I'm curious, how does that factor in? Because I agree that Jeron Jones would be my choice of the two, but maybe is there a way where you get 3? Because again,
there is.
I think that's how it could work out.
No, because I like where you're going with that, because that's one of those things where I look at what Devon Benjamin does bring to the table. As you said, you push for that guy and, maybe he ends up taking an official visit. You push for him until he says no. But it's one of those things where I look at what Jeron Jones brings to the table. I look at what Derek Johnson brings to the table. And I don't want to say it's redundant because I don't think that's fair, where they both are just those big, long corners, which, as we look at this Ryan Walters defense and we look at what John Richardson really likes to do at the position, and you can absolutely take 2 of those guys and you find a way to make it work, where the more big, long, athletic corners you have on the outside, the better, right? Where we talk about Dylan Robinson, he does all those things really, really well. I look at the recruiting battles for both of these guys as well, and I think they're very important, in terms of, hey, you want to be able to continue building that national brand, right? And continue to be able to say, oh, well, we beat out this school, and that school. And that's where, I would default to Jeron Jones right now. And again, as you said, if you can take both those guys, you absolutely do. You find a way to make it work because they're both great fits for John Richardson. But I look at, after Jones gets the Bama offer, he's still got Texas and USC on his trail, along with, he's got Arizona State in there, which, people might scoff at that offer, but they were in the college football playoff last year. That's one of those ones where I look at it and I say, yeah, no, that's, a bigger offer than some people might make it out to be at this point in time. But I look at this class and I say, it's nice. The most important thing for me, at least, is it's nice to see Washington in on so many high-end prospects, really all over the field, but especially in the secondary.
It's the point of go after the top talent, push yourself in the conversation, and let the board sort itself out, where you're not just saying, hey, we're going to put all our eggs in the Devon Benjamin basket. And then, because we've seen staff do that at a point where it's like, hey, sometimes schools think, hey, if we pretend that, he's the only guy that we want and we're going to focus solely on him, that he doesn't choose us, well, now you're kind of out of luck. So when you look in that mold, and I think you obviously know Jedd's never going to be that type of guy where he's going to have the appeal. He's got the gravitas to bring in the right coaches who are going to have the pull to say, we can be in those elite conversations to the end of the day. We might not get all 5, but we might get 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5. And really, that's all that matters, because as long as you're stacking that talent year in and year out, that's really all that matters at the end of the day.
Speaking of talent, the stacking talent, that's what Washington's trying to do on the defensive line. And Anthony Jones, one of the top targets, committed to UCLA, but that might not be the worst thing in the world. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds is the kind of atmosphere you must experience live. And this year's matchups are already delivering. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. I love that the app just lets you see your exact view from the seat before you buy. I used it back when I was in Houston last year for a Bucks Rockets game. That was a whole lot of fun. The app makes it ridiculously simple. Just 2 taps and you're done. And with the game time guarantee, you know you're getting the best deal. Find a better price in the same row and section. They'll credit me 110% of the difference. And Game Time also makes scoring NFL tickets just as easy. You can find great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So Lars, Anthony Jones had Washington in his top 3. He was down to Tennessee, UCLA, and UW. And as we're recording this on Thursday, commits to UCLA. And I look at that and I say, he's up to 6'5", 280. And it's certainly going to be viewed as a loss, especially after Washington had a crystal ball for him from On3's Chad Simmons for a little while. But I look at this and I say, Washington is in on so many other high-end prospects. This was expected of somebody. Right? Like I'm not trying to knock anybody's talent, but I'm just saying Washington was never going to reel in every single, player that they wanted at the position. Somebody was always going to go elsewhere. And after getting Derek Coleman-Brusa and still looking at Kari Wilder, looking at David Schwartzel, Fasciale, all of those guys who are in that same, big athletic versatile mold where you can have them play with their hand in the dirt on the interior if you want them to. You can have them be a stand-up edge if you want them to. One of those guys was going to go elsewhere.
Exactly, and I was ironically we're going down the list. It's like of the guys even scheduled to come in on that May 30th visit with him. You're talking about Landon Barnes, Derek, obviously. You go down Anthony Jones, David Schwartzel. There's already guys on that list where you're saying, okay, well, one of you guys are going to have to figure it out because you mentioned Wilder's still coming in on the 20th. Fasciale, you still have him on the board, and so when we're talking about it's kind of what we're talking about at the end of the last segment. Just put yourself in the conversation where you don't know what's going to happen down the road. So this is why we talk about being in the conversation so that when guys do commit, you don't feel like, ooh, now we got to go offer somebody else and we got to pivot. It's no, we're already on the board. And by the way, players know this. Like they see who they offer. Everybody knows that. People talk to people. So it's not like players are clueless, but you just think, well, that's how you get maybe FA and David to stay home is Anthony Jones goes elsewhere. And so there's ways in which you got to play Tetris with the board. But as long as you're in the conversation, yeah, you're not going to get everybody. That's no program is going to get everybody. UCLA isn't going to get everybody. Sometimes local Cali guys want to stay closer to home and some guys they don't. And so there's no fault. It's not like, obviously it's the loss for Washington, but it doesn't become a detrimental loss until other guys on the board also go elsewhere. And then it's like, ooh, okay, now you're stacking dominoes against you.
Absolutely. I'm glad you put it that way because let's say Kari Wilder just goes elsewhere, right? Let's say Ohio State swoops in and grabs him. And then one of Fasciale or David Schwartzel decides to go they both have visits set up with Michigan State. Let's say one of them ends up there. All of a sudden, this is a very different conversation. But that's not where we are right now. I'm looking at this and saying he wanted to commit before taking any of his official visits. Like he was originally set to commit later in June. I believe the 22nd or the 23rd, after he wrapped up visits to all 3 schools. And so he wanted just to secure a spot now, which is fair. That's totally fine. And a lot of prospects want to do that. And if UCLA said, yeah, that's what we want from you right now, totally fair. You can go do that. And I look at just where he might have ranked on Washington's board after some of these other offers, after, rankings updates don't necessarily affect Washington's board, right? But it might, give some people who don't necessarily follow recruiting very closely a better idea of how colleges are starting to view certain players. And, unless you're Cody Green and you fall for no particular reason after committing to Washington, that part didn't make sense, but that's, not a topic on today's show. I look at just David Schwartzel getting his 4th star. It's one of those things where we knew how big of a prospect he was and how valuable he is to Washington's coaching staff. And, Notre Dame swooping in late with an offer. It's okay. Maybe there's a little bit to worry about there. But I look at where Washington sits along the defensive line right now, especially after you're able to get Derek Coleman-Brusa to commit so early in the process. And I say, I feel comfortable with this right now. Because, let's say you're able to get Schwartzel and Kari Wilder by, let's just call it June 27th. because that's a week after the final weekend of official visits. Let's say both those guys are committed to Washington by then. Great. You're sitting in a really solid spot there. Plus T.I. Umukais. Let's throw him in that boat as well. But if you have those four guys, I don't feel like people are going to be looking back at this and saying, I'm really concerned about losing Anthony Jones.
Yeah, if you give me Kari Wilder and T.I., just no slight to David and Evan, just give me those two.
Sure.
Do not care. Do not care. Like, just in terms of there's certain wins that you can say, hey, like that's a tough loss to take. But if you get a certain combination of guys, plus then you throw in the in-state guys, that's a perfect class for Washington. Where again, when we talk about a couple of months ago, where how could you design the perfect class for Washington? Sure, if you take every guy, yeah, it's great. It's gonna, no doubt you're gonna hit a home run there. But for me, it's like as long as you get the right amount of the right combination, and when we're seeing all that being the in-state guys and the Cali guys, like that's the perfect combination. It's kind of what we talked about, I think, a couple of weeks ago on the show, where it's if you can take a Wilder and go into Colorado and get T.I., and then you get the in-state guys, that's all you need. You need to reload, but you don't need to hit the whole reset button here.
So I agree that'd be all you need, but I don't think that's all they want.
Yeah.
And I say that because I think you'd want to add a Dakota Dixon in there as just a long-term projectable guy. I think that'd be really nice. But there's one other piece that the more I look at this class, the more I think you have a need for. And that's a just true outside linebacker who's going to play a lot of stand-up edge for you in the mold of a Landon Barnes, where I look at him being, 6'3", 6'3.5", 230 pounds listed right now. And that's why one of the reasons I was so intrigued by Sean Scott, who ended up committing to USC. I think that's just a very different style of player that Ryan Walters would love to have. Like, look at the role that we're going to see Isaiah Ward and Russell Davis fill this season. I think you want somebody who fits that, and that's one of the reasons that I'm so intrigued about where Landon Barnes stands, just in terms of where Washington stands with him. Because I look at some of the other visits that he got set up, right? LSU, Ohio State, SMU being the close to home one there. And I think that's not going to be an easy victory to pull off. But if you're able to find somebody, whether it be him or somebody else who fits that, just outside pass rusher mold, I'm just going to say the Isaiah Ward mold, because we saw what that could be for you at different points last season. I think that would be really critical for this scheme as well.
I agree with that. And also, because I think we talked about Landon Barnes. I certainly mentioned him a week or two ago, and saying, "Hey, the Duncanville thing. Like anytime you can get a guy from Duncanville." As you were saying all that, I'm thinking, well, going to Georgia is one thing, going to Ohio State is one thing, going to Ole Miss, all the visits that he has set up. But what are the odds you're going to play in your first 2 years there versus Washington when we're talking about having to reload the position and all the other guys are going to be leaving that room over the next year and a half with, Ward, Davis, Durfee. You go down the list, that room does, it's going to have, open season here pretty soon. If I'm Landon Barnes, I'm thinking, okay, I obviously am good enough to play at these other schools. Yes. But when you look at the other guys that you're in that class with, it's like, are you going to get buried, or are you going to be, that other building block opposite of Derek to say, hey, you know what? Derek's on one side, I'm on the other, kind of like, not to trigger some people here, but Jack Sawyer and JGT for Ohio State back in the day. But you know where I'm going with this, right?
No, I do. Yeah,
you get both. You don't just say, hey, we just want one or just the others. Go get them both, see what happens. And I think that's in the case with Landon Barnes, where you can't turn down that talent. And if you are Ryan Walters and Jason Kafusi and Aaron Van Horn, I say, you know what? Look at our room, man. It's you and Derek next year if you want it. And
to put a bow on all this, that's why it might not be the biggest loss right now to see Anthony Jones go elsewhere. Because you look at that particular position, where this is something I talked about the other day. There are three kinds of defensive linemen that Washington's recruiting. A true defensive tackle, or two, as we talked about. These versatile guys that can play all over the formation. And then that true outside linebacker, stand-up pass rusher. You can find ways to get all of those different types of bodies in the room. And then it's just a matter of, you're losing 13 guys over the next 2 years. You will find ways to figure out how to get them all on the field. Lars, on the other side of the break, you're going to tell us why Armon Parker is your biggest sleeper for 2025. Right after a message from our friends over at Wayfair. The days are getting longer, the weather's warming up, and people are spending more time outside, which means it's the perfect time to refresh your outdoor space. Whether you're working with a big backyard or a small balcony, Wayfair has everything you need to make it feel more like you. Wayfair's massive selection of outdoor essentials makes it easy to transform any space into your ideal summer setup. From comfy conversation sets to sleek dining tables and outdoor decor, they've got it all and at prices that fit your budget. I love the mix of styles they offer. Wayfair makes it super easy to find pieces that match your vibe without spending a fortune, and the delivery is free and hassle-free, even for the big stuff. Shop a huge selection of outdoor furniture online this summer. Get outside with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So Lars, I'm just going to give you the floor here. It was great to, have some time to talk about some of my biggest sleepers, but since we had a scheduling conflict that day, I was like, we need to make sure that you get yours in here as well. So you've got a top 3 for us, and at number 1 is Armon Parker.
And so, let me ask you, do you want to go 3 to 1 or 1 to 3?
Let's go 1 to 3.
Okay, so the reason why I have Armon Parker at 1 is because we haven't seen him yet, except for the spring, but we know exactly what he was capable of coming out of high school. He was the bigger brother that everybody wanted. Javon was crazy enough, the throw-in for every other school.
Yeah,
Washington was
so weird to
talk about. I know, but Inoke Breckerfield was like, no, wait, these are brothers, give me all of them. And I think when we saw Armon Parker this spring, it was like, whoa, man, that guy, like, he's finally healthy, he's finally there. And that's why he's a sleeper, because in any other scenario, he would be coming in as a projected starter because he played the last 2 years in some capacity. But because he's been hurt, that's a guy where it's like you just don't know what you're going to get from him. But, man, what I saw from him this spring, like, if he can stay healthy, if he's there, he's going to certainly be in the rotation. I don't think he'll be a starter because, again, I wouldn't expect that of him. But I certainly would not be surprised if he's in the upper echelon of snaps and total impact when it's all said and done at the end of the season.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. Let me ask you a quick question right now. The first game, Washington's first snap on defense, who are the 3 starting interior defensive linemen right now?
Ooh, well, that's an interesting one because for me, I'm thinking that's a really good question.
So here, I'll give you a second here.
Yeah.
If you need a second, I'll give you my 3 because I've got Simone Peppa at nose, okay. I got Ontario Thompson, and I have Taitayu Youngolole. So the 3 transfers. And it's one of those things where I think Armon kind of fits into that, that second team mold where, if Logan Sagapolu is the nose and then you've got Armon or Bryce Butler and Alinius Davis, like that's a really solid rotation of 6. And there are still other guys that we haven't mentioned that had really impressive springs as well.
Okay, those are the 3 that I was going to say. I just didn't want to put Logan in front of Simone because, again, they're kind of both that similar player. And I think Simone is ahead of him at this point, just naturally still kind of playing more D-line. But I think Logan did make some improvements in this past spring, kind of in the mold that Armon did as well. So I agree with those 3. I would just, I think there's going to be so much more interchange that those are the guaranteed. I think I'm not saying guaranteed starters, but I would certainly pencil them in pretty fine letters. That's pretty safe bet at this point from what we saw in the spring. But it's who's going to be behind them. Who's that second and third wave? Because I think that's going to be the other thing. It's not, to me, it's not who starts. It's how many rotations do you have? Because now you have Armon available. Now you have Logan getting healthier. Now you also have Alinius Davis. Because that was the other guy that I was kind of torn between, where do you put him in this whole mix? Because
exactly,
he was really good this spring. But you have all those veterans ahead of him, Ontario being a senior, Ty being an upperclassman. And it's just it's hard to put Alinius in front of either of those guys, but that's the conversation you're having where that's the good problem that Washington's now going in the season with versus who do we have along the defensive line behind 2 or 3 guys?
That's what separates good teams from great teams in the Big Ten is that depth in the trenches. And that's something where, I think about the national championship game. That was one of the biggest things that Michigan team had was elite depth and talent along the defensive line. And it's why it gave the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line so many fits. I think about the Ohio State teams of years past. I think about the LSUs, the Georgias that have won championships in recent seasons, the Alabamas. They all have that in common. They all have those elite top-tier defensive linemen. And I don't think that this is necessarily an elite defensive line in terms of nationally, but it is so much improved from what we saw last year. And so much of that is because you added contributing depth. That's not going to be this is a guy where, I like the upside. I see what could happen here. No, it's this guy produced at a lower level in Ontario Thompson, and he has that Big Ten experience. This is somebody who produced at Arizona with Tai Uyunglele. This is an all Pac-12 player who produced in Simone Peppa when he's healthy.
Yep.
So that's really important, but it's, to get back to Armon Parker before we move on to your number 2, that's what makes a guy like Armon so important alongside Bryce Butler, alongside Elenius Davis, is when you're able to keep that, that trio that if it's 3rd and long or it's 3rd and whatever, and you need a stop, like it's 3rd and goal, those are the guys who throw it out there. Like that's what makes somebody like Armon so much more important, when he can eat 10, 15, 20 snaps and not just be productive, but help out everybody else around him, which is just absolutely critical, which I think is fair to say for your number 2 as well.
Exactly. A perfect segue into that, because Jacob Lane is my number 2 for me, because he's versatile, because he can do a number of different things. When you ask me, like, who's your starting 3 on the interior, it's like, well, Jacob isn't an interior guy, but he's shown, hey, I can actually line up as an inside, hand in the door kind of guy. And that to me is why he's so intriguing, because we saw him as a freshman get in on those 3rd down speed packages. And then last year we saw him get in on a number of snaps as well. And I think even in the spring, we kind of both looked at each other like, forget about Jacob Lane here. Like, he's right there. Like, he's and that's why that was a take where that was Caitlin's take, right? Correct me if I'm wrong there, where you look at him and think, like, not a guy that was like a top guy in the state when he was coming out, obviously a good prospect, but he was a guy that made an impact right away. And I think for, when it comes to sleepers, it's like, don't sleep on Jacob Lane, because he'll catch you before you even realize it. And I think his versatility in Ryan Walter's scheme that's what's going to make him so valuable, because he can play outside and a little bit inside. And I think when it comes to making those waves, and, when you talk about maybe a 3rd down, 3rd and long package where you want to have some extra speed guys come in who could play inside or outside, I think that's where Jacob fits into this, and having that versatility is key.
So there's only one thing I disagree with there. I think he's going to be set purely on the outside because of all the talent and depth we've seen on the interior. And I think that's really beneficial for him, because I look at, some of these other guys in the rotation that are going to play outside linebacker. I look at Isaiah Ward and Russell Davis, who are just very different players because they just aren't as built and not necessarily as, as big a part of plans against the run as a Zach Durfee will be when he's healthy, as a Deshaun Lynch will be. And I think Jacob Lane just kind of fits right there into that mold of, you're going to find a way to use this guy. What that role is going to be, 10 snaps, 15 snaps, 20 snaps, we're not sure, because a lot of that depends on health, especially if, a guy like Durfee. And, maybe it depends on how much you want to use a guy like Tai Uyunglele on the outside as well. But I look at this entire just outside linebacker room, and there is a really big, role that Jacob Lane could play in this defense come this fall.
And the point is having those bodies to be able to use against matchups. I think that's the key here, where you have so many different body types and different guys who can do different things. For Ryan Walters, that's heaven, because you don't need a guy similarly on offense where we're talking about 20, 25 snaps. Nobody's really going to be doing that. It's the 15 to 20, 10 to 20 snaps. Like, game to game, that's going to change. But that's okay, because you're talking about winning matchups. You're trying to win one-on-one matchups. You're trying to win certain, kind of battles that you're going into each game. Some Big Ten teams are overlapping, but there's a couple that are not. And so when you look at, Ryan Walters' defense, it's like, as long as you have position versatility, Ryan Walters can do a number of different things. So that's good enough for me.
No, I couldn't agree with you more there. Before we get out of here, you've got one more guy to get to, though.
The agenda. The biggest agenda from the spring, the one that I will die on the hill for, is Chris Lawson, where we look at the receiver position, obviously, because we ran through a couple of names before this, obviously, to peel back the curtain a little bit. And I was like, what about him? What about him? And it's like, what? Actually, let's just go with the agenda, because some of the other guys that are above Chris, let's just, we already know who they are. Rashid, Audric, those guys, they're not necessarily sleepers because we know about them enough. We've talked about them enough, which I guess some people could say, well, you do talk about Chris Lawson enough. It's like, well, still a freshman. And that's kind of the caveat here, is where do you find a role for how many freshmen are going to be in there? And there's an honorable mention here for Raiden Vinesbrand, where when healthy this spring, balled out. Problem, wasn't healthy the entire spring. Chris Lawson was there day in, day out. I swear I counted 5 drops. Like, you can count the number of drops in one hand for Chris Lawson's spring. Everybody had him, but Chris just seemed to be the guy that was always there, making plays inside, outside, That doesn't mean he's going to be, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. He's not going to usurp Omari. He's not going to usurp Kevin Green. But I certainly think by the end of the season, you're going to look and say, wow, like Chris really put himself in contention for 2026, where, some of these other guys, when Denzel leaves, Omari leaves, now you're looking at, okay, who's going to step up next? Don't be surprised if Chris Lawson finds himself at one of the top guys in the depth chart next season.
No, I can agree with you more there. And I'm glad you mentioned the thing with Raiden Vinesbright, because I got a couple of questions about that the other day, where it's, Raiden was awesome in the spring game. And it was, and, we're not knocking him for an injury, but we just saw more of what Chris Lawson brought to the table throughout the spring. And if Raiden Vinesbright is healthy throughout fall practice, I feel like he's one of the guys where, spoiler alert, we're going to do a show on this in the future. We're going to talk about guys who won't, be redshirted in 2025. Raiden Vinesbright would be on that list for me. And I think Chris Lawson, no matter what, will be as well, because I look at this class of wide receivers and I say, there's no way you can't play one or two of these guys. What that's going to look like, we don't know. What if Deji Jose comes in and shows out this fall, or Desmond Roebuck does the same thing? Maybe we're having a different conversation. But Chris Lawson being that one of those early enrollees, and just the way that he wasn't just a security blanket for, one of the backup quarterbacks. Like, he wasn't just running second team with Kai Horton. He was doing a lot of really good things with DeMond Williams, with that first team offense, because a lot of the guys ahead of him were hurt. And he really took that opportunity and he ran with it.
What is the old saying? The best ability is availability.
That's right.
If you're available and you're there and you show up now, and it's not to slight the guys that are hurt, right? If you're hurt, you're hurt.
No.
Do not put yourself in, especially in the spring. Do not overextend yourself. We saw that by keeping Omari out, by keeping Rashid out, by keeping Denzel out. They're going to play in the fall. So that's, how do these guys all factor in together when you add the young guys in? Again, another good problem to have if you're Kevin Cummings, and that's why, just like along the D-line, that's why you reloaded the receivers last season, because now you can span that out, go 2 years down the road and say, you guys, boom, you're set.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.